I am done being the quiet one. They will remember my name. I still know how to make things break. I will teach them what respect looks like. This is not mercy. This is necessary. They call me Grandma Joe like it's a joke. They call me old, soft, harmless. They think my hands tremble only with age, that my heart has grown small enough to fit under a knitted shawl. They are wrong. They have always been wrong about me, and that is the first lesson I learned to use. My name is Josephine Marlowe, but Joe stuck to me when I was a girl who could climb trees higher than the boys and throw a baseball that landed where it was meant to. That same stubbornness stayed like a coal in my chest through the years. Through wartime rationing, through a marriage that hummed like a faulty heater and finally went cold. Through the birth of a son who loved me in awkward ways and then left the house to build a life that did not include my hands. I raised him anyway, patched his shirts, and sewed the courage into him like button thread. The world expected me to be grateful for crumbs of attention. I gave more than crumbs. I gave my life. They forgot. It began small, ignorable slights, a cutting tone over Sunday dinner, whispered jokes when my back was turned. My granddaughter, Lily, once threw a tantrum in a shop because I refused to buy a plastic crown. "Grandma, you're so embarrassing," she said, and the words sliced through me like a paper cut. Shallow, painful, easy to ignore if you keep moving. My son Mark laughed and told her to respect elders. "Respect," he said. The word rolled like a coin in his mouth and then dropped into the velvet of indifference. That laugh did more damage than anything else. It told me I had been reduced to an ornament, a soft sculpture they dusted on holidays. I used to be proud of my patience. Patience is a virtue, they said. Patience kept me alive. But patience does not mean silence when the people you love use your silence as a chair to stand on. There is a kind of slow violence in being taken for granted. Small exclusions, a borrowed joke that becomes public, a birthday ignored because someone else's new job requires more selfies. That kind of erosion sands a person into someone else's convenience. One day I looked in the mirror and could not recognize the woman who had polished their trophies and ironed their shirts. The coal inside sparked. Revenge is a loud word, heavy with imagination and fire. I will not pretend I like cruelty. My plan is not about spectacle. It is surgical. It is about making sure the ledger is balanced, that no one in my small family forgets the way their hands have reached without offering a hand back. If they wanted shame and public shaming, they could have said so. Instead, they chose to chip away at me in private. I will return those chips. I will not destroy them. I will unmask them, like pulling a curtain to show a moldy wall beneath the wallpaper. They should see what they have built on. It starts with a letter. I spent 40 years learning to write with careful economy, notes for the school bake sale, patient letters to my son while he was away with work, 100 grocery lists folded into purses and pockets. My handwriting looks ordinary. It hides what the pen knows. I wrote a letter to Lily. Not a long one, not a dramatic composition, just a folded sheet that smelled faintly of lemon polish and lavender. I wrote it in a tone that matched the sugar they had come to expect from me. Soft, a little clumsy, maternal. I praised her new painting, asked about school, tucked a tiny recipe for lemon custard into the corner. Then I signed it with my name and left the corner of the envelope deliberately unsealed. That letter was the first pebble in a path I had planned for months. It would travel from a table where Lily would read sweet phrases aloud to friends in the park. Someone would take a photograph of the note poking out of an oversized tote and post it with a mocking emoji. From there, kindness would be mistaken for naivete, and naivete would be broadcast. I wanted them to watch how quickly the crowd judges softness as weakness. I wanted my family to feel the cold breeze that comes when people you thought cared start to clap at your misstep. I am not cruel. I am purposeful. Years ago, I learned how to make careful moves, how to patch a leak without ripping down the whole roof, how to coax a stubborn rose into bloom. This plan, small and exact, will make them look twice at their hands. It will make Mark ask himself in the quiet of a Sunday evening whether he had been kind enough, whether he had been present. It will make Lily wonder if she had been right to laugh. And it will make the others who smile too quickly at other people's pain pause. The first day I put the letter under the park bench as if I had lost it was the easiest. I watched from behind a soda machine at the corner shop as Lily and her friends burst into giggles when a teenager found it and read her name aloud. She smiled with that practiced sweetness that had always stiffened me. Later, at the dinner table, when Mark held the letter and made a brusque comment about social media and attention seekers, I let him. I folded my hands like a good woman, and inside my chest, the coal burned hotter. I let him explain to his wife how a small note in a tote became irresistible content. I let their laughter roll around our old oak table like silverware, and I counted every ring. I do not desire their ruin. I want them awake. To be hurt sometimes is to be shaken from the torpor of indifference. Pain is a teacher. It can be cruel, yes, but it is also a mirror. I will use a mirror. I will bend their reflections until they can no longer ignore the cracks. Then, if they choose to repair what is broken, I will show them how to hold plaster and patience both. If they choose to harden, I will step back and let their houses sit in the cold. That night, after everyone returned to their apartments and the house settled into the hush of the late hour, I took out the small blue box I kept beneath my knitting needles. There was a key inside, one I had not used in years, and a photograph of a young man in a work shirt, my son at 20, with his laugh captured mid-spark. The key turned in my palm. I had more leverage than they knew. My plan was not only letters and pebbles. It was about reclaiming knowledge they'd assumed time had taken, the dates of accounts, the names of neighbors who owed me favors, the truth about an inheritance Mark never knew existed. I had spent my life quietly making sure nothing was left to chance. That careful accumulation of small things would not go to waste now. When I finally lay down, the house hummed with the soft music of appliances and the far-off city. Outside, a siren wailed past and melted into the night. I closed my eyes with the strange sense of someone who is about to begin a long walk and knows exactly where each stone lies. I was terrified and elated at once. The coal in my chest, which had been dull for years, glowed like a hearth that had been cleaned and fed and was ready to warm the house or burn it down, depending on how the wind blew. The next morning, Lily kissed my cheek as she left for school. She did not know what I had started. She only felt the softness of my cheek and the ordinary comfort of being beloved by an older woman who had baked her cookies for every break in life. Perhaps when this is over, she will remember that softness as something precious, or perhaps she will remember it as the beginning of her lesson. Either way, she will remember. That evening, Mark complained about traffic and a late meeting, as if the world's weight balanced on his schedule. He did not ask how I slept. He assumed everything was fine. He assumed I was harmless. They always assume. That is what I intended to change. When the mail arrived that afternoon, there was a thick envelope for me and another for Mark. He took his, glanced at the name, and tossed it onto the heap of bills on the coffee table without opening it. I watched him do that and felt a small, very human fury. I stood up and reached for the envelope addressed to me. Inside was a pamphlet for a community gardening class and a note from an old friend offering help with a leak. Beneath those, folded neatly, a line of numbers in pencil that made my pulse skip. The ledger. They had left pieces of themselves visible to those who paid attention. They always had. They thought I had not. I smiled into the quiet house and allowed myself to be proud for a moment. The kind of proud that hums in the bones when you have been underestimated for years and finally remember how to rise. The plan was only beginning. Small things would move. The first pebble had been picked up and dropped. The ripple would reach them like a tide they were not expecting. Outside, the sky had the thin, sharp light of approaching winter. I wrapped my hands around my tea and felt, for the first time in many long seasons, that I had been given a chance to be seen again for who I truly was. A woman with scars and patience and a sense of justice as old and sensible as the soil. When I closed the kitchen door, I heard Lily in the other room, singing softly and off-key to a song she had learned at school. My chest tightened. I would not frighten her without reason. I would not be a monster. I would be the kind of grandmother history rarely writes about, the one who refuses to accept being unseen. At the edge of the plan, a single hinge creaked in my mind like an old promise. I had not counted on one thing, the way the past clings to people like moss. There were secrets in this house older than the resentments. I was starting to understand that when you tug at one loose thread, the whole tapestry shifts, and sometimes something enormous shows itself. I did not yet know if that something would be my salvation or my undoing, but I knew, with the quiet conviction of a woman who has nothing left to lose by being honest, that I would see it through. Tomorrow I would place another pebble. Tomorrow they would laugh again, and the day after that, if they still laughed, then they would have to learn the shape of the river that was moving toward them. The next morning, the world looked too clean for what I was about to do. The sun came in through the lace curtains, scattering across my kitchen table, touching the teacup that still had a ring of yesterday's tea around its edge. Everything looked ordinary, and that was exactly what I needed. Ordinary things don't raise suspicion. Ordinary things can hold the sharpest secrets. Mark left early for work, muttering about deadlines, forgetting to kiss my cheek goodbye. Lily was at school. The house was mine. I moved slowly, but every step had purpose. There was no tremor in my hands as I reached for the drawer under the telephone, where I kept my little black notebook. They thought I'd stopped writing things down years ago, that my memory was fading like an old photograph. They didn't know that the notebook was alive. It held receipts, copied keys, phone numbers, things I'd overheard, quiet things, dangerous things. I sat down and flipped through the pages until I found what I needed, an old contact. David from the bank. He used to be one of Mark's closest friends before he lost his job over some accounting irregularities. Mark had cut him off completely, said he didn't want that kind of man around his family. But I remembered the way David's eyes softened whenever he talked to me at neighborhood picnics. I remembered the guilt. Guilt is a powerful thing when it's fresh, but when it's old, it ferments into favor. I called him. My voice trembled just enough. "David, it's Joe Marlowe. I hope you're doing all right. I need a small favor. Just some old papers I can't seem to find." He hesitated, then sighed like a man whose conscience had been waiting for this call. "Mrs. Marlowe, anything for you. What are you looking for?" "Transactions. From about 8 years ago, under Mark's name, but—" I lowered my voice. "Linked to my late husband's account." A pause. Then softly, "You always were sharper than they gave you credit for." He didn't ask questions. Within hours, I had what I needed, an email with attachments I printed and folded neatly into my apron pocket. It was there, in black and white. Transfers, withdrawals, quiet movements of money that were never discussed. My son had siphoned funds meant for my care. He had sold the property that had been mine by right and placed it under his wife's name. The little farmhouse where I was supposed to retire was gone. No wonder they laughed about downsizing. No wonder they said I'd be better off staying with them. The betrayal settled in me like cold iron. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly I thought it would tear. My Mark, my boy who once cried over a broken bicycle, who held my hand at his father's funeral and promised, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." And he did. He took care of me the way a hunter takes care of the animal before the shot. He made me comfortable, fed me sweet words, then took what was mine. For a while, I couldn't breathe. I sat on the edge of the kitchen chair and stared at the wall clock. It ticked with cruel precision, like it knew something I didn't. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, I started to laugh. A small, cracked sound that turned into something steady. He had played me, and now it was my turn. I began collecting little things, pieces of proof, fragments of their perfect world. I copied the papers and hid the originals under the lining of my old suitcase. I found Lily's forgotten phone on the couch one afternoon and discovered that she had been sending photos of me to her friends with captions like, "Granny Joe lost it again," and laughing emojis. My throat burned when I saw them, but the hurt only fed the plan. Each cruelty was a new stitch in the tapestry. That night, while everyone slept, I went into Mark's study. His computer was locked, but the password was not hard to guess. He always used dates he thought no one would remember, but I remembered everything. I entered the date of his wedding anniversary and smiled when the screen unlocked with a soft chime. I printed more documents, more evidence of his quiet thefts, and left the faint smell of lavender oil in the room, the kind that would make him think of me. I wanted him to feel my presence like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. By the third day, I had everything I needed to destroy him. But destruction wasn't the goal. What I wanted was revelation. I wanted him to look at me across the dinner table and realize, too late, that I had seen through his lies. So I invited the whole family to Sunday dinner. I cooked everything they loved: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. The smell filled the house, warm and nostalgic. They came in laughing, unsuspecting, their voices bouncing off the walls that had heard far too many silences. "Mom, you didn't have to go all out," Mark said, giving me a distracted hug. "Oh, it's nothing," I said, smiling. "I just wanted one good meal together, like old times." Lily rolled her eyes. My daughter-in-law scrolled through her phone, and I sat there watching them, memorizing every detail, their ease, their confidence, their carelessness. Halfway through dinner, I spoke. "Mark," I said softly, "do you remember that little farmhouse near Willow Creek?" He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "Yeah, why?" "I was thinking about moving there again, maybe fixing it up." He blinked, then forced a smile. "Mom, that place was sold years ago." "I know," I said. "That's what's strange. The deed still has my name." His smile faltered. My daughter-in-law looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Oh, I just got curious," I said, sipping my tea. So I looked into it. It's funny what you can find when you start looking. Silence. The kind of silence that hums under the skin. Lily put down her fork. Mark's eyes darted to his wife, then to me. "Mom, whatever you think you found—" "Oh, I'm not thinking," I interrupted gently. "I know." For a second, the air felt electric. He swallowed hard, then forced a laugh. "You must be mistaken." "Of course," I said, smiling sweetly. "Old age does that, doesn't it?" I left it there, let the unease spread through them like ink in water. I didn't need to raise my voice or accuse him outright. Fear would do the rest. After they left, I stood at the window watching their car pull away. Lily turned in her seat to look back at me, her face pale. Mark didn't wave. That night, I burned the extra copies of the papers in the sink and watched the flames curl the edges of truth. The smell of smoke filled the house, heavy and familiar. My hands trembled, not from guilt, but from something else, anticipation. The game had begun. But just before I went to bed, I noticed something that made my heart stop. On the kitchen counter lay an envelope. It wasn't mine. It had my name written in Mark's handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph of me sitting on the park bench last week watching Lily. The angle was distant, careful, like I was being observed, and beneath it, a note. "Mom, we need to talk. Tomorrow. Alone." I stared at it, feeling the coal in my chest flare again. For the first time, I wasn't sure who had started watching whom. Tomorrow would not be ordinary. I barely slept. The night was long and swollen with silence. the kind that hums in your bones when the world outside is still. Every time I drifted close to rest, I saw that photograph again. Me, sitting on the park bench, my hands folded neatly on my lap, my face turned toward Lily like a ghost watching the living. It wasn't a random snapshot. It was deliberate. Someone had followed me, hidden behind the trees, waiting for the right angle. Mark had seen me. He had seen everything. When the first light of morning came, it didn't feel gentle. It bled into the kitchen like an interrogation lamp. I sat at the table with the note in front of me, the one he'd left beside the photograph. "Mom, we need to talk, tomorrow, alone." My fingers traced the letters. The handwriting was sharp, impatient, the kind he used when he was holding his anger by the throat. I could almost hear his voice through the ink. I told myself I wasn't afraid. I was the one who had started this. After all, I was the one who had turned the first key. But still, I felt something in me tremble. Not fear of confrontation, but fear of what I might unleash if he pushed too hard. At 9 sharp, his car pulled into the driveway. I didn't go to the window. I just listened. The crunch of gravel, the engine cutting off, the pause before the door opened. He didn't knock. He used his old key. The sound of it turning made my chest tighten. I had forgotten he still had it, and somehow that felt like a violation. He stepped inside wearing the face of a man who had rehearsed calm in the mirror. "Mom," he said, and the word sounded foreign, like a formality. "Coffee?" I asked. My voice was too steady, too polite. He shook his head. "No. Let's sit." We sat opposite each other at the table where I'd once taught him to tie his shoes, the same table where he'd blown out birthday candles as a boy. It was strange, how easily love and resentment can share a surface. "I know you've been looking into things," he began. His tone was careful, professional, like he was addressing a client rather than his mother. "The bank called me, and David, he said you reached out." I smiled faintly. "Then you know I found what you didn't want me to." A muscle in his jaw jumped. "Mom, you don't understand. It's not what you think." "Oh, it never is," I said. He exhaled sharply. "That property, the money, it was complicated. I moved things around for safety. Taxes, lawyers, all that. You wouldn't have understood the process." I leaned forward. "Then explain it to me now. I'm listening." He hesitated, the mask cracking. "It was for the family, for Lily. You wouldn't have used that land anyway. I had to think about the future." "The future," I repeated slowly. "You mean your future, your comfort, your perfect little image of responsibility." He rubbed his face. "Mom, please, don't make this ugly." "It's already ugly, Mark," I said softly. "You just kept the lights dim so you wouldn't have to see it." His chair scraped as he stood, pacing. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You've been different lately. Paranoid. You're following Lily now?" I blinked. "Following?" He turned toward me. "Don't play innocent. I saw you at the park, sitting there for hours, watching her like—" He stopped himself, lowering his voice. "Why were you there?" I swallowed hard. "Because I wanted to see who she was when she thought no one was watching. I wanted to understand the girl I've been told I embarrass." He shook his head, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Mom, that's not normal. You're scaring her." Something inside me snapped, quietly, like the sound of thread breaking. "Do you know what's not normal, Mark? Stealing from your mother and calling it protection, mocking her kindness, laughing at her when she tries to love you. Stop," he said sharply. "You don't know everything." "Then tell me," I challenged. "What don't I know?" He hesitated, then muttered, "You'd only twist it, like you always do. Like I always see, you mean." His eyes hardened. "You need help, real help. You're talking about revenge, about spying, about the past, like it's alive." "It is alive," I whispered. "You just don't hear it breathing." He stared at me, chest rising and falling too quickly. Then, without warning, he leaned across the table. "If you keep this up," he said quietly, "I'll have to make decisions you won't like about your finances, your care, maybe even where you live." There it was, the threat beneath the son's voice. I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. "You can't move a woman who has already moved herself, Mark." He blinked, not understanding. I didn't elaborate. After he left, I stood in the stillness of the kitchen, my hands shaking, my mind racing. He was frightened now. I saw it in his eyes when he realized I wasn't bluffing. But what he didn't realize was that fear can work both ways. It sharpens both edges of the knife. That afternoon, I went to see Nora, my old friend at the nursing home. She'd been the keeper of my secrets once, back when my husband was sick and I couldn't trust anyone. I told her I needed something from storage, a small metal box with my maiden name on it. She didn't ask questions. She never did. Inside that box was a piece of my past I'd almost forgotten. Old deeds, faded photographs, and a letter in my husband's handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, the paper fragile as a leaf. "If anything ever happens to me, don't trust the lawyer. Don't trust Mark. He's too easily swayed by comfort. Keep the key. You'll know when to use it." I traced his name with my fingertip. He had known. My husband had seen the same shadow in our son that I was only now beginning to name. When I got home, I locked the doors. The day had turned gray, the sky heavy like unspoken words. I tried to distract myself with tea, with knitting, but the feeling of being watched crept back like cold through cracks in the wall. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of a floorboard creaking, soft, careful. Not the cat, not the house settling. Someone was there. I sat up, holding the key in my fist like a weapon. "Mark?" I whispered. No answer. Another sound, something sliding gently against the floor. I got up, heart pounding, and opened the door. The hallway was dark, but faint moonlight spilled through the window, and there it was, an envelope on the floor pushed under my door, my name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. I picked it up with trembling hands, opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper, just one sentence. "You're not the only one who knows." I read it again and again. Someone else was playing this game, someone who had been watching both of us. I pressed my back against the wall, the key still in my hand. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel clever or justified. I felt the cold bite of realization. This wasn't just about me and Mark anymore. The house was no longer quiet, it was listening. The next day, the world didn't feel like mine anymore. The morning light that once comforted me now felt intrusive, like it was prying into corners I'd rather keep hidden. I moved through the house quietly, afraid to disturb something unseen. The envelope from the night before sat on the table, its message burned into my mind. "You're not the only one who knows." But who else could know? David? Nora? No, neither of them had reason to spy. They were loyal in the quiet, dependable way that people are when they've shared guilt, and Mark wouldn't leave a note like that. His threats were always straightforward, sharp, dripping with the arrogance of someone who believed fear made him right. This was different. It had patience. I tried to distract myself. I made tea, fed the cat, folded laundry that didn't need folding. But every sound felt suspicious. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the faint tick of the kitchen clock. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Around noon, I decided to take a walk. The park was nearly empty, except for a few joggers and a woman pushing a stroller. The same bench where that photograph had been taken sat waiting, the paint peeling, the wood warm from the sun. I sat there for a long time, trying to think. Who was watching me that day? I scanned the trees, the benches, the quiet stretch of grass. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. When I got home, something was wrong. The front door was locked, but the faint smell of lavender was in the air, stronger than before. my lavender, the oil I used to dab on my wrists when I needed courage. Only this time, it wasn't on me. It was everywhere. I checked every room. Nothing was missing, nothing out of place. But the feeling stayed. Someone had been here. Someone who knew how to move like I used to when I was younger, careful, invisible. I went to the study, my heart beating fast. The box from the nursing home sat under the desk, exactly where I'd left it. I lifted the lid, and for a second, relief washed over me, until I noticed what was missing. The letter. My husband's letter. Gone. I sank into the chair, my breath catching in my throat. Whoever had been here knew what to take. Not the deeds, not the old photos, just the letter. The one piece that connected everything. I picked up the phone and dialed Nora. She answered on the second ring. "Joe, you sound shaken." "I am," I said. "Someone was in my house." "Did you call the police?" "No." My voice cracked. "No police, not yet." She hesitated. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Remember what I told you years ago," I said. "When my husband died. About the lawyer. About the key." Her voice dropped. "You still have it?" "Yes." "Then you need to open what it unlocks." I froze. "You know what it's for?" There was silence on the line. Then quietly. "He came to me once. Your husband. Before he died. He said if you ever called about the key, I should tell you to go to the cellar." I felt the air leave my lungs. "The cellar?" "Yes, the one under the old farmhouse. The one Mark sold." "But I don't." I stopped. I did know. The key in my nightstand wasn't for any door in this house. It was for something older, something buried. I hung up without another word. That night, I packed a small bag, flashlight, gloves, a thermos of tea, and the key. The sky was bruised purple when I left, the air cool and damp. The drive to the farmhouse took less than an hour, but it felt like I was crossing time itself. The place looked abandoned, but the gate was unlocked. The path was overgrown, the grass whispering against my coat. The cellar door was half hidden beneath ivy, just where I remembered it. The padlock was new, modern, shiny, smug, but the key slid in easily, as if it had been waiting all along. The hinges groaned when I pulled the door open. Cold air rushed out, heavy with the scent of earth and rust. I descended the narrow steps slowly, the beam of my flashlight trembling on the walls. The cellar was small, stone walls, a wooden table, and dust thick as memory. At first I thought it was empty. Then the light caught something in the corner, a metal chest, old and dented. I knelt beside it and turned the lock. It clicked open with a sound that echoed through me. Inside were papers, photographs, and a sealed envelope marked, "For Josephine when you're ready." I opened it with shaking hands. My husband's handwriting again, familiar, patient, so heartbreakingly kind. "If you're reading this, it means Mark has become what I feared. He's taken something that doesn't belong to him. But there's more, Joe. You need to understand why. He wasn't alone." My breath caught. I trusted someone once, someone close. I didn't see the full picture until it was too late. If this reaches you, don't go to the police. Don't trust the lawyer, and don't trust Nora. The flashlight trembled in my hand. I read the name again, Nora. A sound echoed above me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking across the floorboards. I turned off the flashlight, heart pounding. The cellar plunged into darkness. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice. "Mom?" Mark. His voice, faint but unmistakable. I pressed my hand to my mouth. He was here. How? Had he followed me? The trapdoor creaked open, letting in a narrow beam of moonlight. His silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. "What are you doing down there?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. "I could ask you the same," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. He took a step down, then another. "You shouldn't have come here." "Neither should you," I whispered. For a moment our eyes met in the half-light. Mother and son, both trespassers in the same grave. Then, from behind him, another voice spoke. "Joe, put down the key." It was Nora. My knees went weak. She was standing behind him, holding a flashlight of her own, her face calm, almost tender. "You shouldn't have opened that box," she said softly. "Some truths don't belong to the living." And just like that, I realized I was standing between the two people I trusted least, and both of them already knew what I had found. The cellar door creaked again, and the light above flickered. I didn't know which one of them I feared more. The cellar smelled like the past, cold dirt, iron, and something older that had been locked away too long. The air pressed against my chest as Nora's light caught my face. Mark was a step ahead of her, frozen, unsure whether to move toward me or away. The beam from Nora's flashlight trembled on the floor, catching the silver edge of the key in my hand. "Put it down, Joe," she said again. Her tone wasn't angry, it was weary, like someone repeating an order she didn't want to give. I didn't move. "You lied to me." Nora's expression softened. "No, I protected you. That letter, your husband didn't know everything. There were things he couldn't tell you." "Then tell me now," I said. "Why the lies? Why the cellar? Why the letter about you?" Mark turned to her sharply. "What is she talking about?" She sighed, her shoulders sinking. "He didn't just leave you money, Joe. He left something else. A document. Something that could ruin people who were still very powerful when he died. He came to me because I was the only one who could keep it quiet." I felt my knees weaken. "You mean you kept it from me?" "Because he asked me to," she snapped. "He thought you'd go to the police, and he couldn't risk that. There were names in those papers. People who built their wealth on stolen land, bribes, fraud. He wanted you safe, Joe, not hunted." I let out a bitter laugh. And yet, here we are, hunted. Nora's light flicked briefly toward Mark. "Your son knew part of it. He found the property transfer years ago, and instead of asking questions, he took the money and hid the trail. That's why I tried to stop you from digging. I thought if you stayed quiet, it would all stay buried." Mark's face had gone pale. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I asked quietly. "Then tell me, Mark, why sell the farmhouse? Why pretend you did it for taxes? Why take what was mine?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked small suddenly, like the boy who used to hide behind my apron when he'd broken something. I almost pitied him. Almost. "You both treated me like a fool," I said. "You played God with my life because you thought I was too old, too soft, too harmless." "Joe," Nora said softly, "you don't understand what's in that box. Those papers, if they're exposed, everyone connected to them will be in danger, including you." I turned the key slowly in my hand. Maybe danger is the only thing left that makes me feel alive. Her voice cracked. "Please, you can't undo what's been done." I looked down at the metal chest, the documents lying like coiled secrets in the dark. Maybe not, but I can choose who keeps paying for it. Nora took a step closer, lowering her flashlight. "You're not thinking straight." "Oh, I'm thinking clearer than I have in years." I knelt, gathered the papers, and tucked them into my coat. Then I straightened, the flashlight trembling in my grip. Mark watched me with wide eyes. "Mom, please," he whispered. "If you take that out of here, you'll destroy everything." "Good," I said. "Some things deserve to be destroyed." He reached for me, but Nora caught his arm. "Let her go," she said quietly. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "No," she murmured. "Just tired. Let her go, Mark. She's not our enemy anymore." Our enemy. The words hung in the air like dust. I stepped past them, climbing the narrow stairs until the moonlight touched my face. The night outside was bright and still. I could hear crickets, the distant hiss of the highway. The world felt indifferent, and that made it easier. When I reached my car, I looked back. The farmhouse stood in the dark like a witness that would never speak. I knew they were still down there, arguing in hushed voices, trying to decide whether to chase me or let the truth bury itself again. I drove without thinking. The road winding through fields silvered by moonlight. My hands were steady on the wheel. The box sat on the seat beside me, its weight comforting, its secrets alive. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't finished. I stopped at the old bridge outside town, the one that overlooked the river where Mark used to fish as a boy. The water shimmered faintly, black and endless. I opened the box and looked at the papers one last time. Names, signatures, accounts, a whole world of rot wrapped in legal language. I could burn them, end it here. Let the past sink with me into quietness. But as I stood there, the wind lifting the edges of the documents, I saw my reflection in the water, not as the tired grandmother they thought they knew, but as the woman I used to be, the one who never bowed, never begged, the one who built everything they took for granted. I smiled. At dawn, the newspapers would find copies of those papers in their inboxes. I'd already arranged it weeks ago with David, the man Mark thought I'd only called for a favor. The emails were timed. All I had to do was let the morning come. I sat on the bridge until the first light bled across the horizon. The air smelled clean again, sharp and cold. For the first time in years, my hands stopped trembling. When I returned home, there was no note waiting, no envelope, no shadow under the door. Just the quiet hum of the house, the cat asleep on the windowsill, the faint scent of lavender. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the sky turn gold. By noon, the world would know. Mark would see his name, the company's name, splashed across every screen. Nora's silence would buy her nothing. The truth would crawl out of the ground whether they liked it or not. Maybe they'd hate me. Maybe they'd call me a monster. But I'd rather be hated for telling the truth than pitied for swallowing it. When the kettle clicked off, I poured myself a cup, lifted it to my lips, and whispered to the empty room, "We're even now." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel old. I felt free.